Hello guys and happy Monday. So what I'm going to have you guys work on today is pretty much the last lesson about percents. So Landon and Brooklyn, you're actually going to use the notes that you physically have to write on this. For everyone else, so Gabby and Vince and John, unfortunately, yes, you need to do a little drawing on your paper, but it won't be too bad. For Landon and Brooklyn, find in your notes the last page that says Unit 7, Lesson 5. Everyone else, I want you to start just taking out a piece of paper and please write this title. Unit 7, Lesson 5, Converting Percent to Fractions and Decimals. Now you'll notice I'm not really starting with a warm-up today. And the reason I'm not doing that is because I know some of you still need to finish some of the VMath that we had started last class. So on Thursday last week. So I just wanted to make sure we can just get through the lesson and give you time for the couple of you to work on your VMaths to do that. Now remember, it's okay if you don't finish your VMath. We'll work on it tomorrow and hopefully by the end of the week we'll have it all done. Just so you know, our learning objective for today is pretty much the same as our title, in that we're going to convert a percent and fraction to decimals. So we're going to be going back and forth between a percent and a fraction and decimals. They're all very much related. I can start at one and I can get to any of these. So this says, you don't have to write this stuff down. I'll tell you when you need to write things. It says, how do we convert percents to fractions and decimal numbers? Okay, so it says think about 50%. 50% means 50 hundredths. Now we talked about this when we first started learning about a percent, that a percent is I should write this, percent, you don't need to write this down, is per 100. And you don't have to write this down because we already wrote it down when we first started talking about a percent. And so when you are given a percent, to make it a fraction, all you have to do is take the number you see and put it over 100. So for 50 hundredths, as a fraction, it's just 50 over 100. We can also write it as a decimal, and when we do that, it's just 0.50. Now, what I really like to do is that when you have a percent, it's actually quite easy to change a fraction that has a denominator or bottom number of 100 to be a decimal. And we're going to see that because all we have to do is take our top number and move our decimal 2 spots to the left. So we're going to practice that. Now, for Gabby and Vince and John, you are going to have to make this big old table. So I want you to pause here. I do want you to make it look very similar to this. So I want you to have 4 columns, one that's for percent, one that's for your work, one that's for the decimal, and one that's for the fraction. And then make enough rows that you can do all these examples. You won't need to write these like little thought bubbles, but you do need to make your table. So I would recommend you pause the video now just to get your table set up. Awesome. Okay, so everyone should have a table ready to go to start working through this. We're going to take all of these percents and we're going to change them to be both a decimal and a fraction. So this is kind of what we started to do at the end of class on Thursday, is where we started with a percent and we had to go to our decimal. So when we talk about 20%, in this little work box, what I want you to do is just write down the number 20 and just pretend like the percent symbol isn't there. So I'm just going to write 20. What we talked about last time was that if there's not a decimal, assume it's at the very end of your number. And so we're going to draw that in. Now from here, we're going to change this to be a decimal. So what we do, and here's the little thought bubble to remind us, we're going to move our decimal point 2 places to the left. So I want you to put your pen or pencil on your decimal, and I want you to draw 2 loop-de-loops to the left. Where we stop is where our decimal actually is going to be. So now my decimal is here on the far left, and all these other numbers stay the same. So I still have a 20, it's just now on the other side of my decimal. And just to remind you, it's okay to not have a 0 in front of your decimal, but I would say mathematically you'll see it a lot. So a lot of people do like to write 0.20 or whatever that number may be. It's the same answer if you don't, and I'll never mark you off if you forget a 0 there. But we'll make it nice and pretty. We'll make it look nice and mathematical. So we'll write it 0.20. Now the fraction is the easy part because we're starting originally with a percent. And a percent, like I kind of rewrote up here, is per 100. To make it a fraction, we take the number from our percent, so that's a 20. That goes on the top part of a fraction, over 100. And it's always going to be 100 if I start with a percent. And it's because a percent is per 100. So I think we should actually just start with all of our fractions for all of these examples, and then I'll let you work on practicing converting the percent to be a decimal. So let's go down to this 5%. Let's just start with the fraction. The fraction is the easy part. Because I'm starting with the percent, I take the number I see, which is a 5, and I'm going to put it on top of my fraction. And then, because it's a percent, my bottom is 100. Well, that's not too bad. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go down to the 99%. You see, I'll come back and do that decimal, but the fraction is the easiest part. So then my next one says 99%. Okay, well, 99%. So I take the number I see, which is 99. I put it on top of a fraction. And then because it's a percent, my bottom or my denominator is 100. So we have 99 over 100. Hopefully you're starting to kind of get the hang of this. Let's hang on for finishing off the fractions. You're welcome to work ahead. But let's go back and let's go practice our decimal work. And then I'll probably save those bottom 3 for you guys to try on your own and then check your work against mine after we unpause the video. I lost my pen. There it is. Okay. So let's go back to our 5% and let's change our 5% to be a decimal. So we start off by just taking the number we see, which is a 5. And we pretend like that percent symbol isn't there. Now, what we're going to do, change colors, is because there's not already a decimal there, we're going to draw it in. So we assume it's at the very end of the number. So it's on the right-hand side of the number. Next, we are going to move our decimal 2 spots to the left. So I want you to put your pen or pencil on the decimal. Move it 1, 2 loop-de-loops. Where we end is where our decimal goes. But we can't just have this empty loop. So we got to fill it in with a 0. So now I'm going to go over to my little decimal spot on my table, and I'm going to write 0.05. Or to be, make it look nice and mathematical, we could also say it's 0.05. Hopefully it's not doing too bad. Hoping this is going well. Now let's move on to 99%. So let's start with taking the number we see, which is 99, and I'm just going to pretend like that percent symbol isn't there. There's no decimal, so I'm going to start by adding it in. We assume it's at the very end of our number. Now I want you to put your pen or pencil on your decimal point, and we're going to move it 2 spots to the left. Where we end is where our decimal goes. So over here, my decimal spot, I'm going to say it's 0.99. Now let's just make it look nice and mathematical, and let's add our 0 in front to be 0.99. We put that 0 there not just to make it look mathematical, but also because there wasn't any other number. So we don't really like to have these empty spaces. That's another reason why people like to write it in there. Is sometimes we might have a number there, like we're actually going to see that in these bottom examples, where there will be a number in front of our decimal point, and it won't be a 0, and that's okay. But let's just see how this is going to come about. Let's move down to these 3. Now, what I want you to do is actually just to practice. Don't write your fraction yet. I actually want you to hold off on writing the fraction. I'm going to help you with that part. But I want you to practice rewriting these 3% as decimals. So at this time, I ask that you please pause the video to write these answers. Unpause once you're done. Okay, so hopefully you worked through these 3. I asked you to hold off on your fractions. So all we're doing right now is writing the decimal. So we're just checking, you should just be checking your answer against mine. I kind of started it off for you. So a 0.2%, we just take the number we see, which was 0.2. And this had a decimal already, so that was helpful. So we put our pen or pencil on that decimal point, and I move it 2 spots to the left. Where I end is where my decimal goes. So we get 0.002. Well, remember, we're trying to be nice and pretty and mathematical, so let's add in that extra 0 in front. Hopefully you did okay with that. We'll also practice this as a warm-up tomorrow. Moving to the 10.5%, so you take the number as is and you just write it down. Put your pen or pencil on the decimal point. Move it 2 spots to the left. So draw 2 loop-de-loops. Where you end is where your new decimal goes. So we get point, and I'm going to write all of these numbers. I'm going to write 0.105. But again, just to make it look nice and pretty, we're going to say it's 0.105. Okay, last one before we move on to these fractions. We have 560%. So you should just take that number as is, write it out. This one doesn't have its decimal, so you needed to have drawn that in. Assume to start with it's at the very end of your number. Then move your decimal 2 spots to the left. Okay. Well, then that gives me 5.60. So now this is an example of where we don't need to add a 0 in front of our decimal point because there's one already there. Well, that was helpful. Okay, now I asked you to kind of hold off on these fractions because these last 3 examples were a little bit tricky. The reason it was easy at the beginning was because these percents, and I actually want you to add this onto your paper, do a little bracket, a little box thing around those first 3 examples. And I want you to say these, let me do it in a different color. Come on. And I want you to say these are between 1 dash 100. So because these numbers were between 1 and 100, it allowed us to write our fraction so nice and perfect because, well, we'd have what's called a proper fraction where the top number is smaller than the bottom. But for these other three, they aren't going to be super nice. So I want you to do another little bracket thing on your paper just around these bottom examples. And I want you to say, these are not, and I'm going to capitalize that, not between 1 dash 100. So that just makes our life slightly harder. But, you know, we're smart cookies. I think we can do this. We need to think back to when we talked about the names of the decimal spots. So just to give you an example of what I mean by that. Here is a little table. You're welcome to draw this table if you like. We have a 1 spot, and then usually there's a decimal point. And then we would have the tenths spot, which is 1 decimal point after. Oopsies, I'm actually erasing my table and I did not mean to. After the tenth spot, we have the hundredths spot. So that would be 2 decimal points after, or 2 numbers after the decimal point. Is probably another way to say that. And then we also have the thousandths spot. Now this actually goes on for a very long time, but we don't really need more than the thousandth spot in our lives. This is really where we do most of our math problems. So a table like this should look kind of familiar because we've seen it before in some of our previous notes. So I just kind of want to review this because when we have a percent that is not between 1 and 100, like these last 3, then when we write our fraction, we need to be mindful of the spots that we are at. Meaning, where are numbers actually? Just to give you an idea of what I'm trying to come across and say is for this one, where we have the decimal 0.002, if I filled each number in to its appropriate spot, it would tell me if I have a number that's in the 10th spot, or a 100th spot, or a 1000th spot. So just going left to right, and you don't have to do this, just kind of follow along on the screen. My first number was a 0. That was the number before a decimal. Then the number after was also a 0. The second number after the 0 was also a 0. And the third number after the decimal was a 2. So because I have 3 numbers after the decimal spot, this means thousandths. So this is 2 thousandths. So I'm going to use that idea to write a fraction where the number I actually have, the only real number, was a 2. That's going to go on top. Over, we ended in the thousandths. That's 1,000. So this fraction is actually 2 over 1,000. It's pretty big. I want to use the same idea for this next one, where we have 0.105. If I kind of use this idea just to fill in my little table here, the number before my decimal is a 0. Then we have a 1. Then we have a 0. Then we have a 5. So let's see, all my numbers go all the way into this table in the thousandth spot again. So So I just take like the real numbers, this 105, and that goes on the top part of my fraction over, because I ended in a thousandth spot again, the bottom of my fraction, or my denominator, will also be 1,000. Now this might still be kind of confusing, and that's okay. I'm not expecting you to do this 100% and feel great. We'll practice it again tomorrow and kind of answer any questions that pop up. But I wanted you at least to practice a little bit on our asynchronous day. Okay, next one. I'm going to kind of erase this. This is our last table problem, and then we only have one little problem left. This one, we actually have a number in front of this decimal point. So when I start to fill in my table, I will actually fill in a spot in the ones. So there's actually a 5 before our decimal. This is like a whole number. So it's not like, it is a whole number. Now I'm going to fill in the rest of my numbers, which is a 6 and then a 0. So when we start to make our fraction, this is actually going to have two parts to it. Because there's something in the one spot that's our whole number, that's actually part of our fraction. We're going to write this as a mixed number, where we have a whole number, which is 5, and then a fraction, where our fraction is being determined by, let's see, what's the number after the decimal? If I just read it, that's 60. So that goes on the top part of my fraction. And where did I end? I had a 10th spot and a 100th spot. So I ended in the hundredths. 100 means 100. So this one's probably the trickiest one of them all, where we have our fraction is a mixed number of 5 and 60/100. Again, I know this is kind of confusing. It's not as easy as those first 3 examples, and that's okay. Like I said, we're just going to practice this again tomorrow, so I don't want you to freak out or anything, but I did want you to at least have this written down. And then this is our last part of our lesson. So you might want to pause to just copy down this number line exactly how you see it. And then we're going to draw some arrows to decide where do these 3 numbers go. So at least pause the video right now and draw this number line. Awesome. Okay, so we have these numbers, 326%, which I've already written as a decimal to be 3.26. Then we have 3.4%, which as a decimal is 0.034. And finally, we have 73%, which as a decimal is 0.73. All I want you to do is on this number line, we're going to put our own little arrows, kind of like we did last lesson, of where these 3% actually are on the number line. So let's start with 326%. So looking at what we have right now, we have 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. Well, 326 is more than our 100, which means I'm just going to draw a little arrow right here after the 100 to say, hey, this is where 326% would actually be. And right below the arrow, I'm going to write what the decimal equivalent is, which is just written for you, which was 3.26. I just kind of check that off so I know I'm done. Now I'm going to go to this 3.4%. Okay, so I'm just going to look at logically where these numbers would fall. It's 3.4. Let's see. So that's kind of close to 0. 3 is definitely in between 0 and 25. But it's kind of small. So I'm going to say it's probably closer to the 0. So I'm going to draw an arrow sort of near the 0. And I'm going to write 3.4%. And right below the arrow, I'm just going to write what's the decimal. And that's 0.034. And I'm going to check that off because I've taken care of it. The last one is 73%. I want you to do a quick pause on the video. Write down where's 73% on this number line. Okay, hopefully that was probably the quickest pause that you had to do. 73. Well, that's pretty darn close to the number 75. So when I draw my arrow, I'm going to draw close to the number 75%. Your arrow should somewhere be in between 50 and 75. So make sure that's where you have it. If you made a mistake on this one, please correct it. And then finally, you should have added in that decimal right below, 0.73. And that's it. That is it. All we've learned for percent is this. We'll do some warm-up questions like this. So don't worry if some of this didn't make sense. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. But in case you did not finish some of your VMaths, so I know, Vince, you still have 2 VMath assignments I need you to work on. I'm not asking you to finish them, but at least get one more. Try your best to get one more done. Same thing for John. You also have 2 VMaths. Try to get at least one more done. And same thing for Gabby. You also still have 2, so just do your best. Try to get one more. So the minimum I want you to do today, minimum, is get 1 VMath done. That's all I'm asking. Do your best, and if that ends up not working out, life goes on. We'll figure it out tomorrow. But do your best, and that is it. I will see some of you tomorrow. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye, guys.